I get it. I get it. This is like the Canabo. This is like the gaffy stick. This is big bonk thing. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, where we take things from movies, TV shows, pop culture, try to create them in the real world and test them one-on-one from the media that they come from. Now today's episode is just going to be a whole lot of fun. We're going to be taking a look at Thors Hammer and how we would fix it, and also a Warhammer 40k Thunder Hammer. Now I'm going to be combining both of those concepts together, and the reason why is because if I did either of them, I would do them the exact same way. And what I mean by that, this Thor hammer here, I did an episode on when I first started the channel. A lot of fun, you should check it out if you haven't already. And I was thinking about it, well, how would I fix this design? How would I bring out the maximum potential of this giant hammerhead? Well, I would give it a longer handle, essentially. And then I realized that if I gave this a longer handle, it's a thunder hammer. Now, if you don't know what a thunder hammer is, it's just a big, monstrous hammer from the Warhammer verse. So I thought, hey, let's just throw them together, bundle them together. Should be a whole lot of fun either way. Just like this segue to today's sponsor. Yes, today's episode is only possible thanks to all of you guys who support the channel over on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Had you go in there for a minute, didn't I? You guys are what make this possible and make it a lot easier to actually cover the cost to do fun builds like this. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you guys, genuinely. Now, if you want to become a supporter or a Patreon, there'll be links down below. It all goes to supporting the channel and these fun sorts of projects. I try to give back as much as possible by making exclusive content and behind the scenes stuff. But with all that out of the way, I just wanted to say thank you. Let's get to the episode. So for the hammer build, we're obviously going to be recycling the Thor hammerhead from last year's episode. Now, as you can see, everything kind of threads together. So that's going to make it a whole lot easier for me to build the handle a little later on. But I did want to show you the crack in the hammerhead. I got this the last time I tested this. Now I got this because I just hit pretty much an immovable object. I hit something that was too hard for this hammer to handle. So to fix that this time around, what I've got is a 5mm thick solid titanium plate. So I think that should fix that problem very nicely. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw that titanium plate onto the grinder, and I'll have you guys know that this is the first time that I've ever worked with titanium on the channel, that is. You can see that the spark color is so different from steel. It's like a bright white compared to when you're grinding steel. Then I'm going to prepare the surface of the hammerhead for some epoxy, put it on both parts, and then use some screws lastly to fix the plate to the hammerhead. It should not go anywhere ever. This should be more than enough for today's testing. Then I got this really long threaded bar. This is what's going to make up the bulk of the handle and should give us a good strong foundation to work with. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a steel tube over that to give it a little bit more thickness and some strength. Then I'm going to cut some square steel bar for even more thickness and even more strength. Then what I need is something to actually hold onto and give the handle a little bit more of a nicer texture. So what I got was some paracord from this old grappling hook fishing invention thing. It was a good episode, you should check that one out. So I'm going to recycle that as well. I think today's episode theme might be recycling. Then I'm going to use some large threaded bolts to hold all the parts of the handle together with some washers, of course, and a generous helping of Loctite. Then we can wrap around the paracord to finish out the handle. With all that out of the way, let's go get to some of the testing now, because this one's just going to be so fun. Let's get started with our Thor hammer redesign. Now, I haven't showed you the B-roll yet, and I haven't gotten to it yet, because the reason why is let's test it. It's been a year. It was one of the first episodes on the channel. I'm a little nostalgic. Let's see if I can throw this big dangerous thing around again. Let's tempt fate again. Did it once, do it again. So like I said a little bit earlier in the episode, is that this one can kind of go two ways. It's not only a Thor hammer, but it's also kind of really similar to the Thunder Hammer from Warhammer. So it's kind of both of them, a twofer essentially. But the main point is to essentially create a Thor hammer that's fixed, because the issue with the Thor hammer is you have a very stubby little handle. Now, obviously, the lore is that Loki did that because he was f***ing with Thor. I mean, it's his brother, I get it. Most of us can get it. But what would happen if Thor's hammer reached its full potential? If it was a giant f***ing hammer? Now, the caveat to this is, hammers, they're not really complicated, but just because you make a hammer bigger doesn't mean you actually make it better. That's not really how it works. So what we're gonna do is throw this hammerhead on. So when it comes to hammers like this, the best bet is that your character should be like super strength. Without super strength, having hammerheads this big isn't really the best option. There's a reason why when you look at something like a Beck Corbin, a sledgehammer, a regular, every fucking hammer, the hammerheads are rather small because they don't need to be bigger. So with something like this, I'm just curious. When I say I'm curious, I mean this thing is going to destroy everything, especially since I got this giant titanium plate right there, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Let's get started. So this is Tony, all right, in the year of 2025 of our Lord. Is that how you say that saying? I have no idea. Tony he hasn't had an upgrade, but he's had a little bit of a plastic surgery. And the reason why is I have put a fencing mask on him. And the reason why is because this year, I want to show you guys the damage output we can have with some of these weapons. For example, we have the Thors Hammer. I want you guys to see on a replicatable medium that a lot of you guys probably have experience with, that being a fencing mask, the transfer of energy. This is good for results, essentially. I'm nervous. I don't want to kill Tony. Like, this actually may f him up really, really bad. That was not bad. Like, that was a bit of a glancing blow in some aspects, but I didn't feel anything. As in, if that was somebody's face bones, they would be face rubble. Face, what's the word for bone in game? Meal. If that was his bones, they would be turned into dust. Let's do another one, because that was a bit of a glancing blow. Bye, Tony. Holy f, man, like that was nothing. And his face came off. All right, just one more, real quick. All right, let's move up to some mediums where you'll be able to see the damage a little bit better. Let's try some more explodey mediums, because I'm curious if this will be able to rupture the bottle or not, if I'm just gonna hit like a 4 or whatever. Oh, I'm having so much fun. I haven't done this in a while, so I'm fucking enjoying myself. Did you know that less than 50% of you guys are actually subscribed? Would you look at that? Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Huh? Come on, subscribe. Oh, this feels pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, this feels pretty fucking good. I get it. I get it. This is like the Canabo. This is like the gaffy stick. This is big bonk thing. And I fucking love it. Is this another S tier weapon? Oh, maybe not. I don't know if it's an S tier weapon, just because it's a little heavy and it's a little slow and it's hard to fight against. And a Beck Corbin's pretty much better on every single. You got me going on tangents there. Anyway, let's hit something else. I don't want to sacrifice my stand that I just built. So I am going to hit them out of the air. I know, I feel like this is excessive and this is stupid, but I don't want to destroy it, not yet. Let's see if I can get a real money shot straight at camera. F***ing hell. I like this. This is good, man. Like, there is pros and cons to everything, right? It's interesting because this big fuck-off hammer doesn't really add too much to it in terms of its destructive power, right? Simply because I'm swinging something that's very heavy at something that it's obviously going to destroy, but when it comes to like a small hammer, it's able to do the same sort of thing. That's what hammers do. So having such a big head like this, it doesn't add too much benefit. It adds a lot of weight and makes it a whole lot more clunky and harder to wield, but it's so f***ing cool, man. This thing is cool as. All right, it is time to get to Tyrant's initial thoughts score, or TITS for short. When it comes to the Thor Hammer, we're going to be bundling both the first episode version, meaning the stubby version, and this big version together, because there are small differences. Some are positive, some are negative, but at the same time, I think it's fair to put them together, and especially since when we did the Thor Hammer in the first episode, we didn't have the rating system, which, you know, it helps that we have it now. So, starting off with something very simple is the comfort. I mean, on both versions, it was comfortable. It felt really, really good, really solid when you hit shit. So what else can you really ask for, honestly? So I think a 9's fair. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it was still really good. I like it. Both of them are comfortable, essentially. Let's get into the wieldability. Well, it's an interesting one because it got less wieldable when we have the big version because it's a lot heavier. This is all basically steel, and in the other version it was a lot more maneuverable, a lot quicker because it was made of aluminum, still held all its strength, but at the same time it was better than this, is what I'm saying. But this one has more force. You see, there's pros and cons to this sort of thing. So when it comes to the wieldability, I think it's fair to put it somewhere around a 7. You can move them both around reasonably well, but there are other weapons out there that are balanced a little bit better. It's a hammer. It's like a really big hammer. So like, whether we call it the Thunder Hammer or Thor's Hammer, I mean, technically, you know, Thor is the god of thunder, so let's call it the Thunder Hammer. Win-win. In terms of its wieldability, yeah, somewhere around a 7. All right, next up, let's go with the design. The design is interesting because both of them are reasonable. Like, both of them are functional designs. The shorter hammer obviously is a little bit more maneuverable. You have less weight. You can still put a shit ton of force into things, but at the same time, when you put a longer handle on it, you've got a lot more leverage. The force difference is not even comparable. I feel like that's the way to describe it. So when it comes to the design, the gold standard for something like this, in my opinion, would be the Beck Corbin. The reason why is because it has a hammer, so you can actually smash the shit out of things. On top of that, it has a beak, which is basically just like a big blade at a right angle, which is really, really good at destroying things. And then it has a big spike on the top, so you can thrust with things. I tried to give this one a spike, but it turned out to be a little nubbin. So that's what I consider to be the gold standard. So something like this is, I mean, it's still going to turn your face into dust, your bones into dust. It's still going to destroy you, but I just don't think it's as good as everything else out there. So with all that being said, I would probably put something like this big f***off hammer around about the 6, because there's not too much that is actually helped by having such a massive head. You got to remember, this is made of aluminum. That's the only reason why this is so wieldable and reasonably quick and doesn't fatigue the fuck out of me. Now, when you look at all the other designs, the fantasy designs, they are steel. And like I said, you can achieve pretty much all of these results with something like a sledgehammer. And that hammerhead is like this big. So having a giant head is good if you have like super strength, but in the context of, you know, reality and real world, you don't gain too much of a benefit, is what I'm saying. So yeah, I think that's fair for design. And then last and finally, effectiveness. I mean, it's, if you hit someone with it, you will hurt them. And that's kind of all I ask for in effective weapons. So I'll give it a 10. Like, hey, it's a big f***ing hammer. It bonks people really, really good. So, hey, it's effective. But that's gonna give us a final score of 32 out of 40. That's pretty good. Like, I think that's reasonable for something like this. I really like both versions of Thor's Hammer. I like the little stubby version, but at the same time, this big monstrous version is really cool as well. So I'm happy with this either way, essentially is what I'm saying. So I enjoyed doing the Thunder Hammer so much that I'm gonna do something today that I've never done before, and that is modify the build after the testing. Now everything that I'm gonna be adding is purely aesthetic, but it's just so cool. I want it to look a lot more like a Thunder Hammer. So the first thing I did was pulled out my spare parts bin and looked through all my machined aluminum pieces if I had anything that would fit that grim dark aesthetic. There were a couple of parts that I thought fit the profile, so I test fit them to the handle, and I was happy with how they looked. The next thing I did was cut a large section of leather that I'm going to use as the handle wrap. After that, I threaded the handle back to the hammerhead. Now I didn't have a big eagle to put on the head, but I did have a purity seal, so I quickly glued that on. Then I grabbed a little bit of paint to kind of weather the entire hammer so it all kind of fit. And with that being said, here is the completed Thunder Hammer. This thing looks really, really cool. Now everything I added, like I said, is purely aesthetic, doesn't really add to the functionality, but it just looks awesome. But that is going to be all for today's episode, guys. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe, leave a comment down below what you thought of today's episode, and if you want to support the channel and the content I make, there'll be links to my Patreon and YouTube memberships in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.